There are places on Earth that look so unreal your brain refuses to believe they actually exist. Some look like another planet. Some seem created by computers. And then there is a place where the ground stretches to the horizon, completely white, without a single tree, without a single mountain, without even a shadow. At first glance, it looks like snow. But it isn't. It isn't ice. It isn't sand. Everything beneath my feet was salt. Not a thin layer. Not a beach. An endless landscape made almost entirely of solid salt, stretching across more than 4,000 square miles, the largest salt flat on Earth. When I first stepped onto Salar de Uyuni, I felt completely lost. There were no roads, no landmarks, no sense of distance. The horizon blended perfectly with the sky until it became impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. Walking across it felt like walking through an illusion. But something else caught my attention. Far away, tiny buildings stood in the middle of this endless white world. As I got closer, I realized something impossible. The walls were made of salt. The tables salt. The chairs salt. Even the beds were carved from blocks of salt. Who would build an entire place from something that dissolves in water? And more importantly, why? Most civilizations searched for fertile land, fresh water, stone, or wood. But here, people chose one of the strangest building materials imaginable. The deeper I explored, the stranger the story became. Because this wasn't just about unusual buildings. It was about an ancient lake, a forgotten climate, an industry worth billions, and a future that could change the entire planet. I thought I had come to see the world's largest salt flat. Instead, I had arrived at one of Earth's greatest geological mysteries. And the deeper I looked, the more unbelievable it became. To understand why people built with salt, I first had to understand where all this salt came from. Thousands of years ago, none of this existed. Instead, this entire region was covered by enormous prehistoric lakes stretching across what is now southwestern Bolivia. Fish lived here, birds migrated here, and water covered everything I could see. But over thousands of years, the climate slowly changed. The lakes began to shrink, and the sun evaporated the water again, and again, and again. Every time the water disappeared, it left behind minerals, mostly salt. This process repeated for thousands of years until layer after layer accumulated beneath the surface. Today, scientists estimate the salt crust is several meters thick across much of the flat. Standing there, it was difficult to imagine an ancient lake beneath my feet, but nature had quietly spent thousands of years creating something unlike anywhere else on Earth. Eventually, people realized this endless white desert wasn't useless. It was valuable, incredibly valuable. Families began cutting giant rectangular blocks directly from the ground. The salt was surprisingly strong, easy to shape, easy to transport, and almost free. In one of the harshest environments in Bolivia, it became the perfect building material. The first structures were simple shelters, then storage buildings, and eventually entire hotels appeared. Walking inside one of these hotels felt surreal. The walls sparkled, the floors crunched softly beneath every step, and even many of the decorations were carved from salt. The builders understood that water was their greatest enemy. Heavy rain could slowly damage the walls, so every dry season, repairs became part of life. It wasn't permanent architecture, it was architecture that lived with nature. Instead of fighting the environment, people adapted to it. But while tourists admired these extraordinary salt hotels, something far more valuable remained hidden beneath them, something the entire world desperately needed. Salt was never the biggest treasure here. The real treasure was underneath. Far below the white crust lay one of the world's largest reserves of lithium, a metal that most people had never heard of 20 years ago. Today, it powers smartphones, electric cars, laptops, and renewable energy storage. Modern civilization increasingly depends on it. As countries rushed toward electric transportation, the value of lithium exploded. Suddenly, this remote corner of Bolivia became one of the most strategically important places on Earth. Governments noticed. Mining companies noticed. Investors noticed. Everyone wanted access. Standing alone in the middle of the salt flat, it was strange to think that beneath this peaceful landscape, a global competition was unfolding. For Bolivia, the discovery offered enormous hope. One of South America's poorest nations possessed an extraordinary resource, and many believed lithium could transform the country's economy. But extracting it wasn't easy. The lithium isn't sitting in giant rocks waiting to be dug out. It exists inside underground brine, a mixture of extremely salty water filled with valuable minerals. Extracting it requires huge evaporation ponds, massive infrastructure, and significant amounts of fresh water. That created a difficult question. How do you mine a resource essential for fighting climate change without damaging one of the world's most unique natural environments? The debate continues today. Some believe mining represents Bolivia's greatest opportunity, while others fear the environmental cost may be too high. As I watched the sunset reflecting across the endless white surface, I realized Salar de Uyuni wasn't simply beautiful. It had quietly become one of the most important landscapes on Earth. But the greatest surprise still hadn't arrived. Because every rainy season, this place completely transforms. I returned after the rains, and for a moment, I genuinely thought the earth had disappeared. A thin layer of water covered the entire salt flat, only a few centimeters deep, yet it changed everything. The ground became a perfect mirror. Clouds reflected with unbelievable clarity. Mountains floated upside down. People appeared to walk through the sky. There was no visible horizon anymore, just endless reflections in every direction. Photographers travel across the world to witness this phenomenon. Scientists use the perfectly flat surface to calibrate satellites. Filmmakers create impossible-looking scenes without using computer effects. Standing there, I couldn't tell whether I was looking up or down. It felt as though reality itself had become confused. Yet this magical landscape remains surprisingly fragile. Climate change could alter rainfall patterns. Large-scale mining could reshape parts of the environment. Growing tourism brings economic opportunities, but also new pressures. The challenge is preserving one of Earth's rarest natural wonders while allowing local communities to benefit from it. As I spoke with local guides, one thing became clear. For them, this wasn't simply a tourist attraction. It was home. Generations had lived alongside this extraordinary landscape. They understood its rhythms, its dangers, its beauty, and its limits. Perhaps that's why the salt buildings never felt strange anymore. They weren't symbols of human domination over nature. They were reminders that sometimes, the smartest civilizations don't conquer their environment, they learn to become part of it. On my final morning, I walked alone across the endless white plain. The wind was almost silent, and every step produced a faint crunch beneath my boots. The sun climbed slowly above the horizon, turning millions of tiny salt crystals into glittering light. When I first arrived, I thought the mystery was simple. How could anyone build with salt? Now, I realized I had been asking the wrong question. The real mystery wasn't the buildings. It wasn't the hotels. It wasn't even the endless white desert. The real mystery was how nature had quietly spent thousands of years creating something so extraordinary that people eventually built their lives around it. An ancient lake disappeared. A desert remained. Humans adapted. Then the modern world discovered that beneath this ancient salt lay one of the resources that may shape the future of technology. One landscape. Thousands of years of history. And perhaps, the next chapter of human civilization. Places like Salar de Uyuni remind us that the world's greatest wonders are often hiding in plain sight, not beneath towering skyscrapers, not inside famous cities, but in landscapes so quiet that most people drive past them without ever asking how they came to exist. As I looked back one final time, the white horizon stretched endlessly into the distance. It didn't feel empty anymore. It felt alive. Every crystal beneath my feet carried the memory of vanished lakes, changing climates, ancient earth, and generations of people who learned that survival doesn't always come from changing the world. Sometimes it comes from learning to build with whatever the world gives you. And standing there, on an endless ocean of salt, I couldn't help but wonder, how many other impossible places are still waiting to be discovered?